Zarathak moved through the space station's corridors like liquid shadow, her forearms perfectly synchronized in deadly silence. The Valaxian assassin had earned her reputation across 17 star systems as the galaxy's most feared killer. Her obsidian skin absorbed light, making her nearly invisible in the dim maintenance tunnels of Nexus Prime. Tonight's target was a corrupt Galactic Council member who had been selling weapons to rebel factions. The station hummed with the usual noise of interstellar commerce. Alien merchants hawked exotic goods while security drones patrolled overhead. Zarathak filtered out every sound, every vibration, focusing only on her mission. She had studied her target for 3 rotations, learning his habits, his roots, his weaknesses. Ambassador Kelthon of the Rigelian Republic would die tonight, and no one would ever know who killed him. Her curved blades whispered against their sheaths as she climbed through the ventilation system. Each movement was calculated, precise. The Valaxian Assassin Guild had trained her since childhood to be the perfect weapon. She felt no emotion about her kills, no remorse, no satisfaction. Death was simply her profession, and she was exceptionally good at it. The ambassador's luxury suite lay 3 levels above. Security cameras had been disabled through careful electromagnetic pulses. Guard patrols had been memorized down to the second. Zarathak had eliminated 17 high-value targets this cycle alone, each death appearing as accident, suicide, or natural causes. The galaxy's intelligence agencies whispered her name in fearful reverence, though none had ever seen her face. As she reached the final access point, something unexpected happened. Sound drifted through the ventilation grate below her position. Not the usual station noise, but something else entirely. Something that made her 4 hearts skip in unison. It was melodic, haunting, unlike anything in her extensive experience across the galaxy's countless species. Zarathak had encountered the war chants of the Korthak warriors, the crystalline harmonics of the Siluri, even the subsonic death dirges of the Abyssal Collective. This was different. The melody seemed to reach into her chest and squeeze something she didn't know existed. Her hands trembled against the metal grating, an unprecedented breach of her legendary control. The sound was coming from the human sector of the station. She had heard of this young species, recently emerged from their isolated star system. Most galactic citizens dismissed humans as primitive, weak, barely worth notice. They had no natural weapons, no psychic abilities, no remarkable physical traits. Yet something about their music made her entire nervous system respond in ways her training had never prepared her for. Fighting against an inexplicable compulsion, Zarathak altered her route. The mission could wait another few minutes. She had to understand what was affecting her so profoundly. Moving through the ventilation system toward the human quarters, she followed the haunting melody that seemed to call directly to something deep within her Valaxian soul. The human sector was smaller than most species areas, reflecting their recent arrival to galactic society. Security was minimal, almost laughably inadequate by assassin standards. Zarathak positioned herself above what appeared to be a recreational area, peering through the grate at the scene below. A single human sat alone in the center of the room. Male, young by their standards, with the pale skin and dark hair common to their species. He held a stringed instrument she didn't recognize, his fingers moving across it in patterns that produced the mesmerizing sounds. His eyes were closed, his face expressing emotions that Zarathak had no words for in any of the 47 languages she spoke fluently. The melody spoke of longing, of loss, of hope against impossible odds. It told stories without words, painted pictures without colors. The human's voice joined the instrument occasionally, adding layers of meaning that made Zarathak's chest tighten with sensations she had never experienced. This wasn't mere sound. It was something far more powerful and dangerous. For the first time in her adult life, the galaxy's deadliest assassin felt afraid. Not of death, not of capture, not of failure. She was afraid of the emotions this strange human music was awakening within her. Emotions that had been surgically removed during her childhood training, buried so deep she had forgotten they ever existed. The song reached a crescendo that made her body tremble against her will. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to complete her mission, to restore the cold emptiness that had defined her existence. But she couldn't move. The music held her trapped, forced her to confront feelings that threatened to tear apart everything she had been taught about herself and her purpose. When the human finally stopped playing, the silence felt like a physical blow. Zarathak remained frozen above the grate, her breathing ragged, her four hearts racing in chaotic rhythms. She had killed beings who had begged for their lives, who had offered her fortunes, who had shown her images of their families. None of that had ever affected her. But this simple human song had reached into her soul and changed something fundamental. The perfect killer, the emotionless weapon of the Valaxian Guild, was discovering that she was more than her training had allowed her to believe. The realization was terrifying and wonderful and completely unacceptable all at once. Below her, the human packed away his instrument and prepared to leave. Zarathak knew she should return to her mission, complete the assassination that would earn her another substantial payment. Ambassador Kelthon was probably in his suite right now, unaware that death stalked the corridors outside. Instead, she found herself following the human, maintaining her position in the ventilation system as he walked through the quiet corridors, toward what she assumed were his sleeping quarters. She told herself she was conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence on this species that had somehow weaponized emotion through mere sound. But deep inside, in a place she had thought was empty forever, Zarathak knew the truth. The galaxy's most feared assassin was no longer hunting her target. She was hunting answers to questions she had never known how to ask, following a human whose song had awakened something that might destroy everything she had ever been. 3 cycles passed before Zarathak finally returned to her original mission. Ambassador Kelthon had grown comfortable in his security routine, making him an even easier target than before. The Valaxian assassin completed the kill with mechanical precision, making it appear that the corrupt politician had suffered a fatal reaction to his medication. By the time his body was discovered, she had already disappeared into the station's maze of maintenance corridors. But the assassination felt hollow, meaningless. Where once she had experienced professional satisfaction at a job well done, now she felt only emptiness. The kill had been necessary. Kelthon's weapons trafficking had destabilized 3 minor systems and caused thousands of deaths. Yet as she transmitted confirmation to her handlers, Zarathak found herself thinking about Marcus Chen instead of her substantial payment. The human hadn't played his instrument since the Zalonian's visit. Zarathak had continued monitoring his quarters through the security system she had infiltrated, watching him go about his daily routine, without any sign of the music that had so profoundly affected her. He attended cultural seminars, participated in species exchange programs, and maintained the polite, professional demeanor expected of a diplomatic student. But she could see the change in him through her enhanced optics. His movements had lost their previous fluid grace. His interactions with other beings seemed forced, artificial. The spark that had animated him while playing his music had been extinguished, leaving behind a hollow shell that merely went through the motions of living. This bothered Zarathak more than she could understand. She had spent decades perfecting the art of becoming an empty shell, suppressing all emotion and desire in service of her deadly profession. Seeing Marcus transform into something similar felt like watching a unique star collapse into dead matter. The irony wasn't lost on her. The galaxy's most feared assassin was mourning the loss of something she had never been allowed to have: the ability to create beauty instead of destruction. Her thoughts were interrupted by an encrypted message from the Valaxian Guild. A new assignment, this one on the mining world of Kepler's Edge. The target was a human engineer who had apparently developed some form of revolutionary mining technology that threatened several major corporate interests. The fee was substantial, suggesting her employers wanted this particular problem to disappear quickly and permanently. Normally, Zarathak would have accepted immediately and begun planning her approach. Instead, she found herself staring at the mission details with unprecedented hesitation. Another human would die by her hand. Another unique perspective would be eliminated from the universe. How many Marcus Chens had she already killed without ever knowing what made them special? The rational part of her mind insisted that she was experiencing some form of psychological malfunction. Perhaps the stress of her profession had finally caught up with her, causing her neural pathways to misfire in dangerous ways. The Guild's conditioning was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of emotional breakdown. But when she tried to access her emergency mental protocols, the ones designed to restore her killer instincts when they wavered, she found herself unable to complete the sequences. Every time she began the meditation that would suppress her newfound emotions, Marcus's music echoed through her memory, making it impossible to return to the cold emptiness that had defined her existence. Instead of departing for Kepler's Edge, Zarathak made a decision that would have been impossible just days earlier. She hacked into the station's communication systems and sent an anonymous message to Marcus's personal terminal. "Your music matters. Don't let them silence what makes you human." She watched through the security feeds as he received the message. Marcus stared at his terminal for several minutes, his expression cycling through confusion, hope, and fear. He looked around his quarters as if expecting to find someone watching him, his survival instincts finally awakening to the possibility of hidden observers. After several more minutes of internal debate, Marcus retrieved his instrument from storage. His hands shook slightly as he tuned the strings, muscle memory competing with learned caution. Then, very quietly, he began to play. The melody was different this time, more tentative, fragile, like a bird learning to sing after a long winter. But it was still unmistakably human, still possessed of that emotional resonance that had shattered Zarathak's conditioning. Through the ventilation system, she felt her enhanced cardiovascular system respond to the music with the same intensity as before. This time, however, she didn't try to suppress her reaction. Instead, she allowed herself to experience the full impact of the human's art. The music spoke to her of resilience, of the courage required to create beauty in a hostile universe, of the terrible loneliness that came from being misunderstood by everyone around you. For the first time in her adult life, Zarathak wept. The tears came slowly at first, then in a flood that overwhelmed her respiratory systems. She had seen death and suffering beyond measure, had caused most of it herself, yet she had never cried for any of it. Now she was weeping for a human she had never met, whose only crime was possessing the ability to create something beautiful in a galaxy that had no appreciation for such things. As Marcus played, other sounds began filtering through the station's walls. Complaints from neighboring quarters, demands that the noise pollution cease immediately, threats to call security if the disturbance continued. But there were other sounds too, the faint harmonics that suggested at least some beings were listening with something other than annoyance. In the Korthak quarters, a young warrior's battle drums began to echo Marcus's rhythm. From the Solari section came crystalline tones that harmonized with the human melodies. Even some of the station's more exotic residents seemed to be responding, adding their own voices to what was becoming an impromptu interspecies concert. Dr. Vayex's voice cut through the growing music with bureaucratic authority. All residents are reminded that station regulations prohibit unauthorized musical performances. Security teams are being dispatched to restore order. Zarathak watched through the security feeds as armed guards moved through the corridors toward the various quarters where music was emanating. These weren't lethal enforcement units, but they would certainly put an end to the spontaneous celebration of sound that Marcus had inspired. The assassin found herself at a crossroads that would define the rest of her existence. She could maintain her cover, complete her new assignment, and return to the life of profitable violence that had given her status and wealth throughout the galaxy. Or she could act on the impossible emotions that a human's music had awakened in her. The choice, when it came, felt inevitable. Zarathak began moving through the ventilation system with deadly purpose. But for the first time in her career, her target wasn't someone she intended to kill. She was going to save something beautiful instead of destroying it, even if it meant revealing herself to the galaxy as something more than just its most feared assassin. The security team approaching Marcus's quarters would find their equipment mysteriously malfunctioning in the next few minutes, and if they pressed their investigation too far, they would discover why the Valaxian Assassin Guild had never failed to eliminate a target. But tonight, Zarathak's skills would serve a different purpose entirely. The humans' quarters were modest by galactic standards, barely larger than the storage closet Zarathak had hidden in during previous missions. Through the ventilation grate, she watched him move around the small space with efficient, purposeful motions. His name, according to the door registry her neural implants had scanned, was Marcus Chen, listed as a cultural exchange student from Earth. What struck her most was his complete vulnerability. No weapons, no defensive systems, no awareness that death could be watching him from above. Most sentient species had evolved some form of natural protection. The Korthak's armored hide, the Solari's energy manipulation, the Zolonians' telepathic warnings. This human possessed nothing but fragile flesh and an inexplicable ability to create sounds that could cripple a trained killer's resolve. Marcus, sat on his sleeping platform and withdrew the stringed instrument again. Zarathak's body tensed involuntarily, preparing for another assault on her carefully constructed emotional barriers. But this time he didn't play. Instead, he spoke to himself in the human language she had been programmed to understand during her mission briefings. "Another day in paradise," he said with what her linguistic subroutines identified as bitter irony. 12 more months of this cultural exchange program, then back to Earth to explain why nobody wants to hear human music. His voice carried a weight that seemed disproportionate to his words. The assassin found herself leaning closer to the grate, her enhanced hearing picking up every nuance of his speech. Marcus touched the instrument strings gently, producing soft notes that seemed to echo his mood. The melody was different from before, sadder, more personal, like a conversation with an old friend who understood his disappointments. "They don't get it," Marcus continued, his fingers finding familiar patterns on the strings. "The Korthaks say our music lacks the proper battle rhythms. The Silari claim it's too chaotic for their crystalline harmonies. The Zalonians think it's too emotional, too raw. Even the station's AI systems classify it as noise pollution." Zarathak's analytical mind processed this information with growing confusion. How could something that had so profoundly affected her be dismissed as worthless by others? Her Valaxian physiology was not known for aesthetic appreciation. Her people valued efficiency, precision, deadly effectiveness. Yet this human's music had reached past all her conditioning and touched something primal. The young human began to play again, but quietly this time, as if afraid to disturb his neighbors. The melody was gentler than before, but somehow more powerful. It spoke of loneliness, of being misunderstood, of creating beauty in a universe that had no place for it. Zarathak felt her chest tighten again, but this time she didn't fight the sensation. Through her enhanced vision, she could see tears forming in Marcus's eyes. The sight should have triggered her predator instincts. Weakness was meant to be exploited. Emotion was a tactical disadvantage to be leveraged. Instead, she found herself experiencing something completely foreign to her nature: empathy. The assassin had studied thousands of species during her training. She knew that humans were considered emotionally volatile, prone to illogical decisions based on feelings rather than logic. The Galactic Council's files described them as potentially dangerous due to their unpredictability, but also dismissed them as too primitive to pose any real threat. Watching Marcus play his lonely song in his small quarters, Zarathak began to understand that the galaxy's assessment of humanity was fundamentally flawed. These beings weren't weak because of their emotions. They were powerful because of them. They created beauty not despite their pain, but because of it. A soft chime indicated that someone was approaching Marcus's quarters. The human quickly put away his instrument and activated his door panel. A Zalonian appeared in the doorway, tall, pale, with the elongated skull that housed their telepathic organs. Zarathak recognized him from the station roster as Dr. Vaex, one of the cultural exchange coordinators. "Mr. Chen," the Zalonian said in perfectly measured tones, "I must inform you that complaints have been filed regarding noise emanating from your quarters. The station's noise ordinance requires that all recreational activities remain below specified decibel levels during rest periods." Marcus's shoulders sagged slightly. "I was playing very quietly, Dr. Vaex. I made sure to check the sound levels. The issue is not volume, but rather the emotional resonance of your activities. Several residents report that your music creates uncomfortable psychological responses. The Carillion family in the adjacent unit claims their offspring experience nightmares after exposure to your melodies." "Nightmares?" Marcus looked genuinely distressed. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I was just practicing some traditional Earthfolk songs. They're meant to be comforting, not frightening." Dr. Vaex's telepathic organs glowed faintly, indicating he was scanning Marcus's emotional state. "Your intentions are irrelevant. The effect remains problematic. I strongly suggest you pursue more appropriate recreational activities during your remaining time on Nexus Prime. Perhaps you could study Zalonian mathematics or Carillion efficiency protocols." After the Zalonian departed, Marcus sat heavily on his sleeping platform. He looked at his instrument with an expression of profound defeat. Slowly, carefully, he placed it inside a storage container and sealed it away. The action seemed to require enormous effort, as if he was burying part of himself. Zarathak watched this display with growing agitation. Something about the scene offended her on a level she couldn't understand. The Zalonian's dismissal of Marcus's music felt like a crime, though she couldn't articulate why. The universe was full of beautiful, terrible things being destroyed by those who couldn't appreciate them. She had always been part of that destruction, eliminating targets without considering what might be lost. But seeing Marcus lock away his music triggered a response in her that had nothing to do with her training. For the first time in her professional career, Zarathak wanted to protect something instead of destroy it. The realization was so alien to her nature that it made her physical systems react with stress responses she hadn't experienced since childhood. The galaxy's deadliest assassin remained motionless in the ventilation system, watching a lonely human prepare for sleep. Her original mission seemed insignificant now, a simple killing that could be completed at any time. What mattered was understanding why this being's music had awakened something in her that she thought had been surgically removed long ago. As Marcus settled onto his sleeping platform, he whispered something to himself that her enhanced hearing barely caught. Maybe Mom was wrong. Maybe the universe really doesn't need our music. Those words hit Zarathak like a physical blow. She had ended countless lives without feeling anything. But the thought of this human giving up his music felt like a tragedy of cosmic proportions. Something fundamental had shifted in her worldview, and she knew with terrifying certainty that there was no going back to what she had been before. The security team's equipment failures were subtle but comprehensive. Their communication devices suffered from electromagnetic interference that made coordination impossible. Their energy weapons experienced power cell drainage that left them effectively harmless. Their door override codes mysteriously stopped working. When they tried to access the quarters where unauthorized music continued to play, Zarathak moved through the station's infrastructure like a guardian spirit, using every skill she had developed over decades of assassination to protect instead of destroy. She had memorized the security protocols during her original infiltration, and now she turned that knowledge against the enforcers themselves. When the lead guard tried to manually force entry into Marcus's quarters, he found his access panel had been expertly disabled. When his partner attempted to call for backup, static filled the communication channels. The team stood in the corridor, increasingly frustrated while the human's music continued to flow through the walls around them. But Zarathak knew her sabotage could only delay them temporarily. Eventually, they would bring in heavier equipment, override her countermeasures, and silence the music that had become the most important thing in her suddenly transformed world. She needed a more permanent solution. Moving through the ventilation system above Marcus's quarters, she dropped a small note through the grate onto his sleeping platform. The human noticed the paper immediately, his enhanced survival instincts finally awakening to the reality that someone had been watching him. He stopped playing and cautiously picked up the message. "They will stop your music by force if you remain here. Maintenance shaft C7, sublevel 3 in 15 minutes. Come alone if you want to understand why the galaxy fears what you create." Marcus stared at the note for several long moments, his human mind obviously wrestling with the implications. Meeting an unknown entity in the station's bowels was potentially suicidal, but continuing to play would certainly result in his music being permanently confiscated. Zarathak watched through her hidden position as the young human made his decision. 12 minutes later, Marcus Chen stood in the dimly lit maintenance corridor of sublevel 3, his instrument case clutched in his hands like a shield. The corridor was empty except for the usual mechanical hums and distant vibrations of the station's life support systems. He looked around nervously, obviously beginning to question the wisdom of following mysterious instructions from an anonymous source. Zarathak emerged from the shadows with deliberate slowness, allowing him to see her approach rather than materializing suddenly and triggering his panic responses. Even so, his reaction was immediate and intense. His eyes widened as he took in her forearms, her obsidian skin, and the unmistakable aura of lethal capability that surrounded her like a second skin. "You're Valaxian," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the mechanical sounds. "I've read about your species in the cultural databases. You're one of their assassins, aren't you?" Zarathak stopped several meters away, close enough to communicate but far enough to avoid triggering his flight response. "I am what my people made me to be, but your music has shown me that I might be something more." Marcus's grip on his instrument case tightened. "My music? I don't understand. Why would an assassin care about human songs?" We're not even considered a significant species by most galactic standards. Because, Zarathak said, her voice carrying an unfamiliar gentleness, your music does something that no weapon in the galaxy can accomplish. It makes people feel things they thought were gone forever. The human studied her face, obviously trying to read her intentions. Are you here to kill me? Is that why you've been watching? I was sent to this station to eliminate a corrupt politician. That mission is complete. You were an unexpected discovery. Zarathak paused, struggling to find words for concepts she had never been taught to express. I have killed beings across 17 star systems. I have ended lives without feeling anything about their deaths. But when I heard you play, something inside me that was supposed to be dead came back to life. Marcus's fear began to mix with curiosity. What do you mean? What happened when you heard my music? I remembered what it felt like to be more than a weapon. The words came slowly, each one a revelation to herself as much as to him. Your species doesn't realize what you possess. You create beauty that can reach across evolutionary differences, across millions of years of separate development, and touch something universal in consciousness itself. The human looked down at his instrument case, then back at Zarathak. The other species don't seem to think so. They find our music disturbing, chaotic, emotionally excessive, because it threatens them. Zarathak replied with sudden understanding. Your music reveals things about themselves they would prefer to keep hidden. Emotions they've been taught to suppress, dreams they've been conditioned to abandon, connections they've learned to fear. Above them, the sounds of increased security activity echoed through the station's structure. Heavy footsteps, mechanical scanning equipment, the systematic search that would eventually lead to this location. Dr. Vayex's voice crackled through the communication systems, announcing station-wide protocols to locate and eliminate what he termed disruptive influences. They're looking for you, Marcus said, his voice tense with worry. They're looking for both of us now, Zarathak corrected. By helping you, I've revealed myself as something other than the perfect weapon they believe me to be. The Guild will consider this a malfunction requiring correction. Marcus's face paled as he understood the implications. I'm sorry. I never meant to put anyone in danger. I just wanted to share something beautiful with the universe. Don't apologize for being what you are, Zarathak said firmly. Your music has given me something I never knew I was missing. It's shown me that there's more to existence than dealing death efficiently. The sound of approaching search teams grew louder. Soon they would have to move or be discovered, but Marcus made no move to flee. Instead, he opened his instrument case and withdrew his guitar with steady hands. What are you doing? Zarathak asked. If this might be the last chance to play, then I want to play for someone who actually hears the music instead of just the noise. Marcus positioned his fingers on the strings, his expression resolving into something approaching peace. You said my music brought something back to life inside you. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what art is supposed to do. As the first notes filled the maintenance corridor, Zarathak felt the familiar transformation beginning in her chest, but this time she also felt something else. A fierce protective instinct that had nothing to do with her training and everything to do with the choice she had made to become something more than a killer. The Raur, Galaxy's deadliest assassin, stepped closer to the human whose music had saved her soul, and prepared to defend something beautiful against a universe that preferred its weapons to remain empty of hope. The music that filled the maintenance corridor was different from anything Marcus had played before. Knowing he had a listener who truly understood the emotional weight of his art seemed to unlock something deeper in his performance. The melody spoke of courage in the face of impossible odds, of finding connection across the vast loneliness of space, of beauty that refused to be silenced even by the threat of death. Zarathak listened with every fiber of her being while simultaneously monitoring the approaching search teams through her enhanced hearing. The security forces were getting closer, their heavy equipment cutting through her earlier sabotage efforts with systematic efficiency. In perhaps 10 minutes, they would breach this location. Marcus, she said quietly, not wanting to interrupt his playing but knowing they needed to address reality. I can get you off this station, but we need to leave now. The human's fingers never stopped moving across the strings as he responded. Where would we go? This is a deep space station. There's nowhere to run that they won't eventually find us. There are places in the galaxy where beings like us can exist, Zarathak replied, though she wasn't entirely certain this was true. Hidden worlds, Forgotten systems. Communities that value things other than profit and conformity. Marcus played a questioning phrase, the musical equivalent of asking whether she really believed what she was saying. The melody seemed to suggest that he had already accepted his fate, that he understood the universe had no place for his kind of beauty. This resignation sparked something fierce in Zarathak's transformed psychology. She had spent her entire life accepting the galaxy as it was, working within systems that valued death over life, efficiency over art, control over freedom, but Marcus's music had shown her that acceptance wasn't the only option. No, she said with sudden intensity, we don't have to accept their version of reality. Your music proves that something better is possible. Before Marcus could respond, the corridor filled with the harsh light of military-grade scanning equipment. Dr. Vayex's voice echoed from hidden speakers. Zarathak of the Valaxian Assassin Guild, you are in violation of your conditioning protocols. Report for immediate neural adjustment. The fact that they knew her name meant the guild had been monitoring her activities more closely than she had realized. Her neural implants had probably been transmitting her behavioral anomalies directly to her handlers. The music that had freed her had also exposed her. How do they know who you are? Marcus asked, his playing faltering for the first time. Because I was never truly free, Zarathak admitted. None of us are. The guild doesn't just train assassins, it owns them completely. Heavy footsteps approached their position from multiple directions. The search teams had triangulated their location and were moving to surround them. In moments, both of them would be captured. Marcus would lose his music forever, and Zarathak would be reconditioned into the empty weapon she had been before, unless she chose to fight. The decision crystallized with perfect clarity. Zarathak had been designed to be the galaxy's most effective killer, trained from childhood to eliminate any threat with maximum efficiency. Now, for the first time in her life, she would use those skills to protect something instead of destroying it. Keep playing, she told Marcus as she drew her curved blades. No matter what happens, don't stop the music. The first security team rounded the corner just as Zarathak moved into combat position. These weren't standard station guards, they were guild enforcers, Valaxian specialists sent specifically to retrieve a malfunctioning asset. They moved with the same liquid grace she possessed, their own weapons gleaming in the harsh light. Stand down, Zarathak, the lead enforcer commanded. You know resistance is futile. Your conditioning can be restored. The human will be processed according to guild protocols. I know what guild protocols mean, Zarathak replied, her voice deadly calm. The human's music stays alive. That's not negotiable. The enforcers exchanged glances, obviously surprised by her defiance. In the guild's long history, assets didn't develop the capacity for rebellion. The conditioning was supposed to be perfect, irreversible, absolute. But they hadn't accounted for the power of human music to reach across species barriers and awaken emotions that transcended their biological programming. The first enforcer moved with blinding speed, his weapon seeking her throat in a killing stroke that would have been impossible for most beings to counter. Zarathak met his attack with techniques that matched his own, but powered by something he couldn't understand, the desperate need to protect something beautiful. The battle was brief, but incredibly violent. Zarathak fought with a fury that surprised even her, each movement motivated not by training but by the music that continued to flow around them. Marcus kept playing throughout the combat, his melodies providing a soundtrack of hope that made her faster, stronger, more determined than she had ever been. When the last enforcer fell, Zarathak stood breathing heavily in the maintenance corridor, her blades dripping with fluids from multiple alien physiologies. But victory felt hollow. More guild operatives would come, better equipped and more numerous. This was only the beginning of a war she couldn't win through violence alone. We need to get you somewhere safe, she told Marcus, who had never stopped playing despite witnessing combat that would have traumatized most civilians. There is no safe, Marcus replied, his music shifting to a melody of acceptance and determination. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to make music while we can, to create beauty even when the universe tries to stop us. His words hit her with the force of revelation. Zarathak had been thinking like an assassin, seeking victory through elimination of threats. But Marcus was showing her a different way. Resistance through creation, defiance through art, victory through refusing to let beauty die even when death seemed inevitable. Then we'll give the galaxy something it's never experienced before, she said, understanding flooding through her transformed consciousness. We'll show them what happens when humanity's music is protected by someone who knows how to fight for it. Marcus smiled as he played, the first genuine expression of joy she had seen from him since the night she first heard his song. That sounds like a story worth telling, even if we're the only ones who live to remember it. Above them, alarms began sounding throughout Nexus Prime. The Guild was mobilizing additional resources, calling in favors from allies across the galactic government, preparing to eliminate what they saw as a dangerous malfunction in their perfect system. But in a maintenance corridor deep in the station's bowels, a human's music continued to play, protected by an assassin who had discovered that some things were worth more than her own life. The galaxy's deadliest killer had found something worth saving, and she would use every skill she possessed to ensure that beauty survived in a universe that preferred its weapons to remain empty of hope. The stolen transport ship cut through hyperspace toward the Omega Nebula, one of the galaxy's forgotten regions where defunct mining operations and abandoned research stations drifted in the cosmic winds. Zarathak piloted with mechanical precision, while Marcus sat in the passenger compartment, his music filling the small, vessel's cramped interior. They had escaped Nexus Prime through a combination of Zarathak's infiltration skills and the unexpected assistance of other station residents who had been moved by Marcus's music. The young Korthak warrior who had joined the impromptu concert had disabled several security checkpoints. A Solari engineer had provided them with falsified departure codes. Even some of the station's AI systems had mysteriously malfunctioned in ways that aided their escape. But their freedom was temporary. Guild tracking protocols were already following their hyperspace signature, and every system in civilized space would soon be alerted to their presence. Zarathak had stolen more than a ship. She had stolen herself, and the Guild would never stop hunting what they considered their property. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked during a pause in his playing. "Perhaps a few cycles before they triangulate our position," Zarathak replied without taking her attention from the navigation console. "The Omega Nebula will provide some interference, but they'll eventually find us." Marcus nodded, accepting this information with the same calm he had shown throughout their escape. "Then I want to ask you something while we have time. When you first heard my music, what exactly did you feel? I need to understand what changed you." Zarathak considered the question as she adjusted their course to avoid a patrol route. "I felt remembered," she said finally. "Not specific memories, but the echo of who I might have been before the Guild took me. Your music showed me that emotions weren't weaknesses to be eliminated. They were the foundation of everything that makes existence meaningful." "And that scared you?" "Terrified me," she admitted. "I had built my entire identity around being empty, efficient, deadly. Discovering I was capable of feeling meant confronting the fact that I had spent decades killing beings who were as complex and valuable as myself." Marcus began playing again, a gentle melody that seemed designed to comfort rather than challenge. "In my culture, we have a saying, music is the language of the soul, but I think it's more than that. I think music is proof that consciousness is more than just survival and reproduction and competition. It's evidence that beauty exists for its own sake." Through the ship's sensors, Zarathak detected energy signatures approaching from multiple vectors. The Guild had found them faster than anticipated, probably using tracking technology she wasn't aware of. Their brief respite was ending. "They're coming," she announced, beginning evasive maneuvers that pushed the stolen transport to its operational limits. Instead of stopping his music in response to the danger, Marcus played with increased intensity. The melody became a declaration of defiance, a refusal to be silenced even by the approach of death. The music filled the ship's hull, vibrating through the metal and creating harmonics that seemed to strengthen the vessel itself. The pursuing Guild ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapon systems already charging for the kill. Zarathak recognized the configuration, a hunter pack designed specifically for retrieving rogue assets. There would be no escape through conventional piloting. "Can I tell you something?" Marcus said as the enemy vessels closed the distance. "Before I met you, I was starting to believe that maybe the galaxy was right. Maybe human music really was just noise, incompatible with civilized society. But seeing what it did to you, how it broke through conditioning that was supposed to be absolute, now I understand that the problem isn't with our music. The problem is with a civilization that fears genuine emotion. The first energy blasts began impacting their ship's shields. Zarathak returned fire while simultaneously plotting an escape route through the nebula's treacherous gas clouds. But she knew they were outgunned and outnumbered. This would likely be their final conversation. "Your species doesn't realize its own significance," she told him, while executing a desperate evasion pattern. "You're not just another addition to galactic diversity. You're evolutionary proof that consciousness can choose beauty over survival, art over efficiency, hope over despair. That's why they fear you." Marcus's music shifted to something Zarathak had never heard before, a song that seemed to encompass everything they had experienced together, from her first encounter with his art to this moment of facing death in the depths of space. The melody spoke of transformation, of finding connection across impossible differences, of the courage required to choose love in a universe built on violence. As the song reached its climax, something extraordinary happened. The nebula around them began to resonate with the music, its gas clouds pulsing in rhythm with Marcus's playing. The electromagnetic fields that permeated the region started generating harmonic frequencies that amplified his melodies, turning the entire stellar phenomenon into a massive musical instrument. The guild ships faltered as the resonance effects interfered with their targeting systems. Their precise formations broke apart as pilots struggled with equipment failures caused by the nebula's unexpected behavior. For the first time in her memory, Zarathak saw guild operatives displaying something approaching confusion. "The nebula is responding to your music," she said in amazement. "The electromagnetic frequencies are creating sympathetic vibrations across the entire region." Marcus smiled without interrupting his playing. "Music is a universal language. Maybe the universe itself knows how to listen." The resonance effects grew stronger, creating a protective barrier around their ship, while simultaneously disrupting the guild vessel's pursuit. But Zarathak knew this reprieve was temporary. Eventually, the enemy would adapt, find ways to counter the interference, and complete their mission. Unless she gave them a different kind of problem to solve. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that would change everything, "I want you to broadcast your music across all galactic communication frequencies. Let every world, every station, every ship hear what you're playing right now." "That would expose us to everyone," Marcus pointed out. "Every government, every military force, every bounty hunter in the galaxy would know exactly where we are." "Yes," Zarathak agreed. "But they'll also hear what I heard. They'll understand what human music really is, and some of them might choose to protect it instead of destroying it." Marcus looked at her with an expression of complete trust. "You think your people are ready for that kind of beauty?" "I think," Zarathak replied as she activated the ship's communication array, "that my people have been waiting for it their entire lives without knowing what they were missing." As Marcus's music began broadcasting across the galaxy, carried by the nebula's natural amplification, Zarathak prepared for whatever came next. She had already chosen her side in the war between beauty and emptiness. Now it was time to discover whether the universe was ready to choose as well. The response to Marcus's galactic broadcast was unlike anything in recorded history. Across 17 star systems, beings stopped what they were doing to listen to the music flowing through their communication networks. On Korthak Prime, warriors laid down their weapons and wept. In the crystal cities of Solaria, harmonics that had been silent for centuries began to resonate. Even the cold logic centers of Zilonian space stations registered unprecedented fluctuations in their emotional processing subroutines. But the most dramatic response came from an unexpected source: other Valaxian assassins. Zarathak watched through the ship's sensors as guild vessels throughout the nebula began to break formation. She could hear confused communications between strike teams as trained killers experienced the same emotional awakening that had transformed her. Decades of conditioning crumbled in the face of music that reached directly into their suppressed souls. "This is Strike Team Alpha," came a transmission from one of the pursuing ships. We are experiencing technical difficulties. Requesting immediate extraction." Another voice strained with unfamiliar emotion. "Strike Team Beta reporting equipment malfunction. Weapon systems non-responsive. Crew requires medical evaluation." Zarathak understood what was happening. The other assassins weren't experiencing equipment failures. They were experiencing the return of feelings they thought had been surgically removed forever. Marcus's music was doing to them what it had done to her, shattering the guild's psychological programming on a massive scale. "It's working," she told Marcus as more guild ships began withdrawing from the pursuit. "Your music is freeing them." But not everyone in the galaxy was ready for liberation. Emergency signals flooded the communication networks as governments across civilized space declared the human broadcast to be a form of psychological warfare. Military fleets mobilized toward the Omega Nebula, with orders to eliminate the source of what they termed emotional contamination. Dr. Vayex's voice cut through the chaos with bureaucratic authority. "By order of the Galactic Council, all vessels are commanded to destroy the transmission source immediately. The human emotional virus must not be allowed to spread further." Marcus never stopped playing, even as dozens of warships emerged from hyperspace around the nebula. His music had evolved into something that encompassed the entire crisis they had created, a symphony of liberation that spoke to every conscious being capable of hearing it. "They're calling your music a virus," Zarathak observed as she monitored the incoming fleets. "Maybe it is," Marcus replied with a gentle smile. "Maybe hope is contagious. Maybe beauty spreads when given the chance." The first bombardment began from long range, energy weapons attempting to pinpoint their position through the nebula's interference. But something had changed in the cosmic phenomenon itself. The gas clouds were no longer just amplifying Marcus's music. They were actively protecting it, deflecting attacks and creating false sensor readings that made targeting impossible. More importantly, not all the arriving ships were hostile. Vessels from dozens of species began taking positions around the nebula, their communications revealing the split that Marcus's music had created throughout galactic civilization. Some had come to destroy the source of emotional awakening, but others had come to protect it. "This is Captain Thurl of the Antarian Defense Corps," came a transmission from a massive battleship. "Any vessel attempting to silence the music will be considered an enemy of artistic freedom. Carillion Mining Consortium supports the humans' right to expression," announced another voice. "Our workers' productivity has increased 200% since hearing these transmissions." The space around the Omega Nebula became a battlefield of ideologies rather than weapons. Ships that had been allies for centuries found themselves on opposite sides of a conflict that Marcus's music had crystallized. The galaxy was discovering that it contained two very different kinds of consciousness, those who feared emotion and those who hungered for it. Zarathak piloted their ship deeper into the nebula as the battle raged around them, but she wasn't seeking escape anymore. She was seeking the phenomenon's center, where the resonance effects were strongest and Marcus's music could reach its full potential. "I want to show you something," she told Marcus as they approached a massive gas formation that pulsed with harmonic energy. "I've been analyzing the nebula's response to your music. It's not just electromagnetic resonance. There's something more." As they entered the heart of the phenomenon, the ship's sensors revealed structures that defied conventional understanding. Crystalline formations that shouldn't exist in gas clouds, geometric patterns that suggested intelligence, harmonic frequencies that indicated conscious response to the music. "The nebula is alive," Marcus whispered, his playing taking on new dimensions as he realized what surrounded them. "It's been waiting here, listening to the galaxy's noise, hoping someone would finally make real music." The entity, for that's what it clearly was, responded to Marcus's recognition by amplifying his music across dimensions that Zarathak's instruments couldn't measure. The effect was to broadcast his songs not just through the galaxy's communication networks, but through the fundamental forces that connected all conscious beings. Across known space, the transformation accelerated. Guild conditioning failed on a massive scale as thousands of assassins rediscovered their capacity for emotion. Authoritarian governments found their control systems breaking down as citizens experienced beauty that couldn't be regulated or taxed or weaponized. But the most significant change occurred among the humans scattered throughout galactic civilization. Marcus's music reached every human settlement, every diplomatic mission, every research station, awakening in his species an understanding of their own unique gift. They began to sing, to play, to create music that harmonized with his across the vast distances of space. Dr. Vayex's voice, increasingly desperate. "The contamination is spreading beyond all projections. Human emotional responses are triggering similar malfunctions in other species. Recommend immediate implementation of Final Protocol. Zarathak knew what Final Protocol meant: the complete sterilization of the Omega Nebula and everything within it. The galaxy's authorities would rather destroy an entire stellar phenomenon than allow the spread of uncontrolled emotion. But as the most powerful weapons in civilized space charged for a final strike, something unexpected happened. The music stopped. Marcus had finished his song, the composition that had begun when Zarathak first heard him playing alone in his quarters. The sudden silence felt like a physical absence, a void that made every conscious being in the galaxy aware of what they had been experiencing. In that moment of profound quiet, Marcus spoke words that were broadcast across the entire galactic network. Music isn't something you can kill with weapons. It lives in every conscious mind that's ever felt wonder at the beauty of existence. You can silence the singer, but you can't silence the song once it's been heard. The final bombardment never came. Instead, ships began powering down their weapons, their crews too moved by what they had experienced to complete the order to destroy it. The galaxy had discovered something it hadn't known it was missing, and too many beings were unwilling to give it up. Years later, when historians tried to catalog the events that transformed galactic civilization, they would call it the Harmony Revolution, but those who lived through it knew it by a simpler name: the day the universe learned to sing. Zarathak and Marcus eventually settled on a small world in the Outer Rim, where they established the first school for interspecies musical collaboration. Former assassins became teachers, learning to create beauty instead of dealing death. Humans spread throughout the galaxy not as conquerors or traitors, but as artists who helped other species rediscover their own capacity for emotional expression. The galaxy's deadliest assassin became its most celebrated protector of beauty, and the human whose song had awakened her became proof that sometimes the smallest voices can change the entire universe's understanding of what it means to be truly alive. In the end, they discovered that the galaxy hadn't been missing weapons or technology or efficiency, it had been missing hope, and music was the language hope used to remind consciousness that beauty was worth preserving in a universe that seemed determined to forget it existed.